warm spring day in New York City, Lacey, a student, decides to go jogging. In Central Park, a tick is awakening. It is a fully grown female. She has been hungry for quite some time, but now she feels a new vitality. And with this vitality comes the craving for a meal of blood. Ticks can neither hear nor see, but they possess a highly sensitive sensor that reacts to warmth and breath. Now the tick must be on the alert. It worked. 1/10 of a second is enough time for a tick to climb on board a victim. Ticks live for 4 years and need only 3 meals in this time. They can reduce their metabolism to the absolute minimum and are extraordinarily frugal. Now the tick concentrates with all of her senses on feeding and will not let up. Lacey encounters a friend at a sidewalk cafe, not realizing that she is carrying an unwanted guest. The tick senses the closeness of blood. Now she must find the right place.
5:30 call time.
The victim's sock is like the thickest jungle to her.
I look at my watch, 5:25. I have 5 minutes to get there. I never thought I was going to make it in time. And then all of a sudden, out of the clear blue sky...
Now the coast is clear, but she doesn't bite at once. Ticks hate the sun, so she must find a hidden area on Lacey's body.
Thank you.
The hollow of the knee seems ideal. Nimbly, she scratches the skin and forces her proboscis inside. The vampire has achieved its goal. For ticks to really feel at home, they need beech trees or oak trees and a layer of rotten foliage. Here they find protection against the cold, ice, and dryness. They also need their hosts, which usually come in the form of mice and deer. The ticks' hunting tactics have been perfected over the course of evolution. That is why they do not fall from trees. The risk of falling to the wrong place could endanger their existence. Down in the grass, their hunting prospects look much better. Of course, they don't just lie there passively in waiting. Their most important sense organ is situated at the tip of their front legs. When they feel warmth or sense carbon dioxide, they take the offensive. Regardless of whether it is sleeping deer or children playing, ticks attack their victims from all angles. What looks like a head are actually apparatus for piercing and cutting. The body parts on either side of the proboscis, which protect this sensitive tool, are now folded away. The tick then scratches the skin open, and the proboscis, which is shaped like a barbed hook, slides little by little into the opening. The victim does not notice a thing. The tick's saliva contains a secretion that reduces itching in the early phases of the bite. And if nobody stopped it, the feeding would last at least a week. Back in her apartment, the student, Lacey, has not noticed her companion. The tick is anchored firmly with its hooks. It will not be easy to shake it off now.
is that? Oh my God, there's a tick.
Due to the extreme frequency of tick bites on the east coast of America, there are several clinics with departments specializing in tick-related diseases. For example, the Westchester Medical Center in Valhalla, New York.
Want to come with me, please?
Tick expert Donna McKenna takes a look.
I know you're very anxious to get this tick off, and I will examine the rest of you later. Where is the tick?
Behind my knee.
Okay, come lay down on this table, and I'll get right to that, okay? Oh, yeah, I see. Here. Let me take a closer look. Oh, yeah, this looks like an adult female deer tick. I want to remove it now, and I'm going to ask you to stay very still while I do so.
She takes the tick with a small set of
Okay.
tweezers as close as possible to the bite wound so as not to squeeze the
There you
tick
go.
and pulls it out.
Good.
So is this dangerous? I mean, can I get Lyme disease from this?
That is the tick that transmits Lyme disease in this area of the country. However, the risk of Lyme disease is very low. The adults do not frequently transmit the infection, and this tick looks flat, like it hasn't fed for very long, and that's a good thing
Okay.
for you.
Lacey doesn't need to worry. She only had the tick since that morning, and if a fully grown tick is removed within 24 hours without being squeezed, the risk of infection is almost zero.
Bye-bye.
Millicent Vohl wasn't so lucky. She had been a regular patient at the Westchester Medical Center for 8 years. The reason? Lyme disease. Millicent Vohl's housing estate is named In the Woods, and that is where it is, in the middle of the woods, perfect for ticks.
Since I'm a kid, I've always been prone to get bites. And sometimes ticks, all kinds of bugs seem to be attracted to me. And I had this bite on the back of my leg, which I thought was just a mosquito bite. But it was bothering me longer than most bites. And I was visiting with my friend, who happens to be a nurse. And she says, that doesn't look like a regular bite to me. And it was a big ring, like about the size of my hand. And I'd never seen anything like that before. And she said, well, I think you really ought to take care of this. I don't think you should neglect it because it could be Lyme disease.
Millicent is not the only victim in her neighborhood.
My next-door neighbor was sick for 3 weeks with severe pain in all her joints, especially on the right side. But my neighbor across the street also had a bad experience. She had fever and almost felt like she was delirious from the Lyme disease.
The bite of a tick itself is not dangerous. However, the tick may be carrying a number of different pathogens in its body. Like malaria mosquitoes in the tropics, ticks are the most dangerous carriers of disease known to the industrialized world. They can infect their victims with viruses, bacteria, tapeworm, and single-celled organisms. At least 10 diseases survive mainly and some even solely inside of ticks. The most common of these is Lyme borreliosis.
I've had very bad experiences with ticks. I've had Lyme disease 5 times in the last 7 or 8 years.
Problems concentrating, problems with sleep, problems finding words, problems with short-term memory.
I knew that something was wrong with me, but I never thought it would be that bad.
Austrian Reinhold Egger, a chemical factory worker, was completely paralyzed after a tick bite.
I think that it's quite possible we'll find that these ticks transmit other pathogens and that there will be other tick-borne diseases described in the not-too-distant future. And we're only beginning to appreciate the potential variety of pathogens that they may carry and transmit to humans.
Lyme disease. The story of the discovery of this disease runs parallel to the story of the suffering of this man. 25 years ago, Dr. Todd Murray was bitten by an infected tick. Since then, he has had major heart problems.
On a scale of 1 to 10, about how severe was it?
The first time I had a heart problem was before I was in medical school, so my understanding of what was happening to me at that time was not as good, and it was frankly more frightening to have my heart going very fast and irregularly. But still, it is concerning to know that I seem to have a chronic problem with my heart.
Todd Murray grew up in the town of Lyme on the east coast of the United States. The idyllic region at the estuary of the Connecticut River is a paradise for children.
It was a very beautiful place to grow up. All around our house is woods that we would play in. There were cows in the woods back then, and we would play cowboys and Indians together and chase the cows.
Then, in the summer of 1975, the happy life of the 12-year-old boy came to an abrupt end. It began with a harmless fever, aching joints, and a false diagnosis.
Unfortunately, I was told that I had the summer flu at that time and went on to experience symptoms for the whole summer. Eventually, about 3 months after the initial symptoms, I developed swollen knees. I didn't get better for probably a year or two after when the arthritic symptoms gradually faded, but I was on crutches for many months at a time.
Eventually, the whole family became ill. Todd's parents and his older brother Sandy began to experience the mysterious symptoms.
At one point during that summer, 2 boys woke up and couldn't move their knees. They just couldn't straighten their knees, Todd and Sandy. And so we just couldn't figure out what was happening to our family. And my husband had a strange rash on his back that kept expanding outwards. It was just a huge circular rash, and we'd never seen anything like it. And it was thought to be a spider bite.
The Murray family had often been bitten by ticks, but they did not suspect these parasites.
I didn't believe it could be tick-borne because I'd looked up in the library all the tick, diseases, and it didn't fit. We wondered what could be causing it. We even thought maybe it was something in our drinking water, so we had the water tested because we have a well, and that was okay.
Polly Murray carefully recorded all of the symptoms and visits to the doctor on the calendar.
We were all being diagnosed differently, with trauma problems or with, I was even thought to be a hypochondriac. An orthopedic doctor just said he didn't want to hear about the rash. He wasn't a dermatologist, and I couldn't get anyone to really listen to the whole picture.
Then Mrs. Murray found out about similar cases in the region. Children were suddenly coming down with swollen joints and couldn't walk anymore. She researched like a detective and eventually delivered a list of 48 cases to the authorities.
But once the research started, we did feel at least vindicated from this, horror of living with something that was totally unknown.
Much to the dislike of the city council, the symptoms of this new disease were named after the town of Lyme. Finally, scientists came and examined the possibilities of transmission. In all of the cases, they suspected insects to be the cause and planted insect traps. The researchers were sure that the pathogen was a mysterious virus. The media also became interested in the strange occurrences in Lyme. In the end, all 48 cases that Polly Murray had presented to the authorities were investigated according to their living circumstances. 39 of the patients were children. Most of them suffered from extreme swelling of joints, others from nerve paralysis. And something else was conspicuous. The river seemed to build a natural barrier. There were practically no cases of this strange disease to be found on the other side of the river, where the woods were not so thick and the houses were built closer together. There were many fewer deer, and of course, fewer ticks. When asked about incidents involving contact with insects or spiders, it was discovered that every 4th victim had remembered a tick bite. And finally, after 2 years of exhaustive research, the parasites came to the center of the investigations. That ticks could transmit fever-causing bacteria was a long-known fact, but could they also be host to other unknown pathogens? Thousands of ticks were dissected and the contents of their intestines put into nutrient mediums. Finally, at the beginning of the 80s, there was reason to celebrate. Something was moving inside a tick's mid-intestine. Not a virus, but something much larger. Corkscrew-shaped bacteria, so-called Borrelias, close relatives of the syphilis pathogen. Ticks are born as 6-legged larvae. In this first stage of life, the spider-related arthropods are no larger than 1 millimeter in size and almost impossible to see with the naked eye. A fully grown spider looks like a true monster in comparison to these larvae. Only in this stage of life are the ticks free from pathogens. They begin to hunt immediately. They crawl over foliage and onto short stalks. Mice are their most important prey. Here, a larva has found its way onto the whisker of a mouse and is looking for a place where the skin is thin enough for it to penetrate with its tiny sucking device. The diminutive parasites usually settle for the areas around the ears and eyes. If the mouse has pathogenic agents in its body, the larva also gets infected and becomes a danger. After 2 days, the first meal of blood is over. Even when the larvae are full, they are still tiny in comparison to a full-grown insect. It can take months for the tick to evolve to its second stage of life. The larvae then pupate, and eventually the nymph is hatched. It has 8 legs now, but is still extremely small and not really recognizable as a tick. And that is what makes it so dangerous. The nymphs begin to hunt for larger hosts, perhaps a polecat, or maybe a human being. Due to the fact that nymphs are so difficult to see, they are responsible for about 80% of all tick-transmitted diseases. In the course of evolution, borreliosis bacteria have adapted themselves perfectly to the way of life of the tick. The bacteria, which normally hide in the connective tissue, seem to know when their host has been bitten by a tick. It is likely that they recognize the traces of saliva. They then enter the bloodstream, travel to the bite wound, and allow themselves to be sucked up. Ticks are the only chance for the borreliosis bacteria to spread. And when the adult tick is finally hatched from the skin of the nymph, it retains all of the pathogens it has sucked up in its previous 2 meals. The old shell is left behind. In the beginning, the borreliosis bacteria was heavily concentrated around the Lyme area. But in the 1970s, agriculture went into a decline. Farms disappeared, and former pastures turned into woodland. Game animals were taken care of and fed, and soon multiplied at a very fast rate all over the east coast of the United States. Gary Wormser is one of the leading tick experts in the USA. When he began his work in the early 1980s, his area of research was an entirely different one.
When I moved up here from New York City, my interest was HIV and AIDS, but the increasing frequency of these tick-borne diseases and their particular relevance to our area sort of gave me the impetus to change my direction.
Parallel to the increase in the number of deer, the cases of Lyme disease also increased.
By the mid-1980s, the number of cases escalated, and by the late 1980s, we were seeing huge numbers of patients with possible Lyme disease.
But the last chapter of the tick-borne diseases story has yet to be written. Just recently, a new pathogen was identified, Ehrlichia. The discovery came with the blood test of a woman who had caused a traffic accident. She had extremely high fever. During the blood analysis, Maria Aguero Rosenfeld, the director of the laboratory, discovered something surprising.
Half of the patient's leukocytes had inclusions inside the white cells. So this is one of the highest infection rates I ever seen under the microscope. Here you see an inclusion, a microcolony of Ehrlichia inside this white cell.
Similar to the AIDS virus, the Ehrlichias attack the immune cells and multiply there. In the meantime, cases have been reported worldwide. The only known transmitter is the tick. The insidious aspect of these particular pathogens is that they can survive for weeks in a refrigerator, and they are not yet included in routine safety tests for donated blood.
I think the story goes on and on. I don't think we've reached the end of the potential for tick-borne pathogens. I fully expect that there'll be additional tick-borne pathogens discovered in the United States and around the world.
glorious autumn day at the Lewis Calder Research Center in Armonk, New York. Wildlife biologist Tony DiNicola and his hunters prepare themselves for a large contract. In the name of science, they must anesthetize over 100 deer and examine them for tick-transmitted infections. The aim is to find out once and for all exactly what role the red deer plays in the spreading of tick-borne diseases.
Worst case scenario, we just put you, you just all park up at bushes in the back, and then you can leave from there. Ted should be able to talk to everyone else.
Tony has built a raised platform in a favorable position. This is an ideal environment for turkeys and other wild animals. Tony puts on a mask so as not to alarm the animals. Dusk sets in quickly as he loads his tranquilizer gun. Now he has to wait. In the last ray of evening light, a young roe appears. Tony waits for the right moment to fire his arrow. Frightened, the animal disappears into the woods, but the arrow has already hit its target. The arrow contains a transmitter, which sends signals. A few hundred meters away, Tony and his assistant, Erin, find the half-conscious animal lying on the ground. Now they must carefully examine the roe's fur. Ticks and other parasites, such as deer lice, are everywhere, especially around the stomach area. Erin collects the ticks one after the other. Many of them are already full with blood. After half an hour of care, the antidote is injected into the animal. It awakens shortly afterwards. Still a little dazed, the roe, now free from ticks, perhaps for the first time in her life, slowly makes her way back into the woods. The next day, the parasites are carefully counted and cataloged. Males are separated from females and separately stored. From the body of the most badly infected deer, the researchers count several hundreds of adult ticks and more than 1,000 nymphs. In this way, one deer alone can provide nutrition to facilitate the birth of 1 million ticks per year. All around the area, feeding stations for deer have been set up. In an attempt to reduce the tick plague, Erin soaks the cylindrical sponges, which have been placed around the feeding areas, with insecticide. If a deer then rubs against them, the ticks in its fur will be killed. This experimental project is now in its third year. It was initiated by Yale University's Department of Public Health. Chief epidemiologist and tick expert Derland Fish describes his tactics.
I don't think it would be possible to eradicate ticks, but I think that there may be a way to get their population levels low enough that it may interrupt disease transmission, or at least reduce the threat of disease to humans.
The first results of the insecticide experiment allow for a little optimism. At the center of the areas of study, the number of ticks have decreased drastically. The problem with the method is that the deer and other game animals must be fed even more intensively for it to work. The researchers at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, want to try out a completely new method. Their idea is to catch all the mice in a marked area of the woods and to vaccinate them against Borrelia. Jean and Brandon prepare traps with peanut butter. As darkness falls in the tick wood, the first mice begin to appear. The smell of peanut butter appears to be irresistible. The next day, the researchers check their catch. Then comes the preliminary inspection.
Okay, this is a male, and there are ticks.
The mice's eyes and ears are full of tick nymphs.
There were 8 nymphs.
The mice are injected with the newly developed borreliosis vaccine.
And you just
Inject the whole thing?
just actually go in. You don't even have to inject. Pull out. Pull back.
The following year, it will be possible to see whether or not the epidemic can be stopped.
Okay.
If the experiment were to be successful, then the borreliosis vaccine could be distributed throughout the woods as mouse food, a procedure similar to one that has been successfully used against rabies in foxes for years. Winter is a tough time for birds and game animals. Finding food is extremely laborious and living conditions are harsh. Perhaps the only positive point is that the burden of parasites is distinctly limited. There is no sign of ticks. Ticks begin to reduce their metabolism rate to 0 in October. In order to protect themselves against the extreme temperatures, they bury themselves under the blanket of snow in deep levels of foliage. Here they can withstand temperatures as low as 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which is minus 12 degrees Celsius. The mouse, however, does not possess this ability. It must search for food in a daily struggle for existence. When reserves decline, it must leave its secure surroundings. And the owl is hungry too. With the coming of spring, animals everywhere begin to awaken. And when temperatures climb above the freezing point, the ticks slowly come back to life. The animals soon begin to realize that the pests are active once again. This does not, however, disturb the general desire to mate. The winter has been hard on the deer. Dirty and hungry, they emerge from the woods and begin to graze greedily. Swarms of flies are permanent companions. They are especially interested in the many small wounds and abrasions in the fur. The deer's fur is also an ideal environment for ticks. While the female searches for an ideal feeding spot, the male searches for a partner. He achieves his goal without much effort. The male mounts the female. With her mate on board, she continues her search for a good feeding spot. And as the female begins her feeding frenzy, the male releases a balloon of semen, which he attaches onto the female's sexual organs. This procedure takes time, and as the male completes his task, the female is almost unrecognizable. She is now 200 times her original size. The male then continues on his way. Unlike the female, he takes several smaller meals. His main aim is to mate with as many females as possible. Grunau im Almtal in the Austrian Alps, an international research center for gray geese. Swiss zoologist Gyula is rearing a flock of 10 geese. Once a week, Gyula has an appointment with his British colleague, Jonathan, who is working on a parasite research project. He wants to find out whether the infestation of ticks harms the animal's general health in any way. A trend can be noted. The weaker the young geese are, the more likely they are to be attacked by parasites.
Yeah, not so small. No. This is D'Artagnan, and this is a good 301 grams. Okay, can I have a look? 1, 2, 3, 4.
7 tick larvae have gathered around the young underweight goose D'Artagnan's eyes. The exact mechanism of this phenomenon still needs to be researched. At the moment, Jonathan is examining whether perhaps certain hormones, such as testosterone, could attract the parasites. It begins to rain. Gyula, the so-called goose mother, motions to his flock to get moving. And while Jonathan has a roof over his head, Gyula takes his young, as a goose mother would, under his wing. In Europe, one of the most feared tick-transmitted pathogens is the TBE virus. Austrian chemical factory worker and pheasant breeder Reinhold Egger has been fighting this insidious virus for years. His misfortune began 7 years ago. It all happened when Reinhold Egger was on a trip to a car race with his motor club companions. While camping, he was bitten by a tick. He thought nothing of it until he collapsed at work weeks later.
During work, at about 9 o'clock, I started having problems thinking. My brain felt like it was crackling. I thought to myself, what's wrong with me? Then I couldn't move 2 of the fingers on my left hand anymore.
Egger was brought to the intensive care unit at the nerve clinic in Salzburg. There he fell into a coma. Through the lymph system, the TBE virus had spread throughout Egger's body and had also reached the brain. The result was life-threatening inflammation of the brain. During this phase of the disease, nothing can be done to combat the virus. All the doctors could do was to keep the patient's vital functions going. When Reinhold Egger awoke, he realized that nothing was as it was before.
As I realized what was wrong with me, that I could no longer walk, that I could no longer move, that I couldn't ride my motorbike anymore, I got so depressed that I didn't want to live.
Therapy seemed pointless at that stage. With much coaxing, Egger was persuaded to begin with exercises. Then his will to live took over. His progress was amazing. Only his left hand remained paralyzed.
I was still in the hospital when I said to my wife, "Sell the motorbike. I can't ride it anymore. But my wife said, the bike will not be sold. It will stay in the garage until you come home.
When Josef and Alois, Reinhold's friends from the motor club, invited him into the garage, he had no idea what they had prepared for him. Accelerator, gears, and brakes, the motorbike's functions were switched to the right side. After much effort, Egger finally convinced the authorities of his ability to drive, and his motorbike driving license was returned to him. The big day of his first trip with the club loomed closer. Would he manage the trip, which was to last several days?
The chief doctor said that he might never be the same again, but I didn't doubt for a moment that he could make it.
Reinhold Egger now lives a relatively normal life. Although he cannot move his paralyzed left hand, he uses it for support. There is a very effective vaccine against the TBE virus, and it is highly recommended to people who live in or travel to high-risk areas.
Whenever the subject of tick vaccination came up, we always said, we don't absolutely need it. It's not that important. Now, of course, we're all vaccinated.
It seems to be a much more difficult task to find effective vaccines to combat other tick-borne diseases. In the United States, however, a vaccine against Lyme disease has been found and is now available. Its working principle is rather unusual. Through the vaccine, antibodies, which swim around in the bloodstream in large numbers, are developed. If a tick bites a vaccinated person, it sucks in the blood which contains the antibodies. These antibodies then destroy the borreliosis bacteria in the intestine of the tick. Only in the intestine are the bacteria vulnerable. But Gary Wormser also knows the weaknesses of this method.
There's still many unknowns about the vaccine. The immunity seems to wane at such a rate that it seems likely that booster doses will be required. At this point in time, we don't know when those booster doses should be given, how frequently they should be given, and we have very little safety data on repeatedly vaccinating an individual over the course of many years.
Dogs, unlike mice or deer, can contract Lyme disease. Despite the many questions surrounding the vaccine for humans, a vaccine for dogs has been developed and is selling extremely well in Europe. Lyme disease expert Gerold Stanek is skeptical about the vaccine.
Before we can begin to try to protect an animal from a disease, the effectiveness of the vaccine must be tested in large field studies. And to my knowledge, this has not been done for many species of animal. We lack even the basic studies which would speak for finding a vaccine.
A satisfactory solution to the problem is urgently needed.
About 2% of ticks in certain regions are infected with the TBE virus. The percentage of Borrelia-infected ticks is much higher. One can say every second tick is infected with Borrelias, and there are herds of animals where every tick is infected.
One of these highly infectious areas is Kraichtal. Situated close to Heidelberg in Germany, the valley connects a number of picturesque villages with altogether 3,000 inhabitants. The area is idyllically situated in the wine-producing region. It is damp and warm, an ideal environment for ticks. Today is a big day for country doctor Dieter Hassler. He has been examining the whole population of the Kraichtal for Lyme disease for over a decade. Today, he has invited all the citizens to the town hall, and there he will present to them the surprising results of his research.
We wish to present the results of a study we've been working on for almost 15 years. When I took over the practice from my predecessor in 1984, I noticed that many people had been diagnosed with gout. When somebody has gout, the amount of uric acid is much higher than normal. But back then, we were talking about a crowd of people whose uric acid levels were completely normal, but they did have permanently swollen joints.
Hassler decided to take it upon himself to find out what these people were suffering from, so he gathered blood samples from each inhabitant of the area. 16.9%, or every sixth citizen, tested positive for Lyme disease. Hassler treated those displaying symptoms with antibiotics. Chronic illnesses which nobody had connected with ticks were suddenly treatable. Almost every patient had their own story. For example, Friederike, who came to Dr. Hassler with a red ring on her face when she was 7 years old. Her teacher had been suffering from incredible pain in his knee, and he also had a strange rash on his skin. Pensioner Hans-Peter Hölzel has already suffered from Lyme disease 5 times. Now he has been bitten by a tick once again. He brings the tick to the doctor. With most infections, the body builds up its own immunity after the first contact. This is not the case with Lyme disease. The immune system seems to have great problems combating this bacteria. The reason for this is not yet clear. Research indicates that these bacteria are not so aggressive and are overlooked by the body's immune system. But this peace does not last forever.
We have known for decades, if not centuries, that with syphilis, sometimes there are no symptoms for years, and then they come back again. Today, after lengthy research, we can also say that it is similar with the Borreliosis bacteria. There are long periods of time in which the patient feels no symptoms, but then these symptoms inevitably appear.
The country doctor is now a leading tick expert in Germany and teaches at the University of Heidelberg. In about 60% of the infections, Dr. Hassler registered the characteristic bull's eyes. It appears about 10 days after the bite and can stay for months. The bacteria hide themselves in layers of tissue where they are then, sometimes years later, rediscovered and combated, causing a new outburst of inflammation. In cases of an infection without the presence of the bull's eyes, the Borreliosis bacteria travel straight into these layers of tissue. Hassler proved that the most important aspect in avoiding an infection is the removal technique. To remove the tick from the skin, he uses a scalpel and lifts it out from below. A needle or a sharp pocket knife can also be used. The tick should under no circumstances be squeezed in the process. Blunt cosmetic tweezers or so-called tick tweezers as well as chemical agents are also taboo.
When the tick's air supply is cut off after having been covered with glue or oil, it experiences shortness of breath. This leads to a type of struggle to survive, in which the tick releases saliva. And with this comes the danger of the tick transmitting the pathogen as a result of this struggle to survive. And that's exactly what we want to avoid. See this? That's what pricked you.
The extreme infection rate of 17% is now history due to prevention and treatment.
Now, I'm sure you want to know what the percentage looks like today. I can happily tell you that it has sunk to 1.5%. We have almost managed to rid the Kraichtal of Lyme disease.
The sun is a tick's worst enemy. They do not cope well with heat and dryness. Under these conditions, they tend to flee to damper, cooler areas under foliage until the heat lets up. Ticks do not drink, although they possess the perfect apparatus to do so. They do not actually drink water for fear of acquiring bacteria from it, which could be dangerous to them. The only possibility for ticks to absorb water is through atmospheric moisture. They absorb this moisture through an opening one could call a mouth. This mouth is situated at the rear end of the stomach. When the air moisture increases, the ticks come to life again and go on the hunt for blood. Sometimes, however, they lose their way. From the perspective of a tick, the most harmless of plants seem like the thickest jungle. Fine hairs block the way, and tightrope walking can sometimes lead to a fall. Adult ticks are no longer satisfied with small prey, such as mice. Hedgehogs are the smallest animals to be hunted by them. The spines of a hedgehog are also somewhat difficult to manage. It takes a while before the parasite finds the hedgehog's ears, its favorite place to start a feeding frenzy. What would happen, though, if the tick did not like the taste of the hedgehog's blood? Gary Wormser expects great things from this particular way of thinking.
There are other possible options that are also undergoing investigation, such as immunizing a person to the tick itself, such that on exposure to the tick finds it an unfriendly environment and drops off.
When the female tick begins its final meal, it pumps lymph and tissue fluid back into the wound. It is only interested in the blood. Through permanent spitting and sucking, the tick stirs up a little storm in the puncture channel. The longer it sucks, the stronger its blood supply becomes. At the same time, it excretes growth hormones. In the space of just a few days, the tick has grown to 200 times its original size and falls off its victim like a ripe fruit. The eggs in the tick's belly begin to ripen and are fertilized with the stored semen from the male. The apparatus it has just used to cut open its victim is now used to transport the eggs. This procedure can take several days. Finally, she manages to transport 3,000 eggs. With this, the lifespan of the female tick, which lasts about 4 years, has come to an end. The enormous growth it endured is no longer reversible. Exhausted, the female tick drags its worn-out body to a nearby place to die.
Zecken sind Bestandteil der Natur.
Ticks are a part of nature, and as often as we might ask ourselves what use ticks have in this world, we could also ask ourselves the same question about human beings. We have certain emotions when it comes to ticks because they can transmit diseases, but we certainly have no chance of wiping them out. We will just have to live with them.
In the animal world, ticks have almost no enemies. Not even aggressive ants can harm them. The eggs are greedily scrutinized, but they have been carefully covered with a layer of poison. And while the ants are busy with more important things, the warm spring day brings life to the pile of eggs. Thousands of larvae rid themselves of their shells and crawl hungrily into the world. The cycle begins again.